Let me see. Ah, it works. So it's indeed about the great acceleration of the exponential era. I take it that all of you understand what's the difference between linear progression and exponential regression. Linear is +2, +2, +2, +2. Exponential is ×2, ×2, ×2. It's a very different proposition. So these are many graphs, and they're not designed for you to read the axis on what they actually are. I would like you to look at the pattern of all these graphics. They all show exponential patterns. And if indeed this would be the dashboard of spaceship Earth, you probably would take the microphone and say, Houston, we've got a problem. And indeed we do. Now you saw a similar slide being shown by Helena earlier on, although there was a different one but had the same pattern. This one also starts in 1750, but you see quite a lot of new graphs being added in 1900. She showed the species that were going extinct, like mammals and fish, etc., etc. Here you see things, I apologize for the small print, you see things as population, pollution, CO2 concentration, GDP, motor cars, paper consumption, ozone depletion, etc. Now the single most important line is the red line. It's the line of population. And indeed in the years that I've been associated with our scenario department, several heads of scenarios said the single most important determining factor of future developments is population. Now, population has never ever been above 1 billion people until 1800. And we as a species have been around for 200,000, 300,000 years. So just imagine we had the Black Pest, we've had all sorts of pandemics, so it went up, it went down, but it never exceeded 1 billion. Now, what is it that in around 18 and 1850 you really see that line increasing? Well, before I say what it was, you probably can guess, I want to make two more qualifications about population. Population is not only about numbers. Obviously, numbers matter, because more people consume more energy, eat more food, take more place, waste more things, throw away more things. Albeit that wealthy people consume more energy, eat more expensive food, have more waste. So when you talk about population, we should not only look at the number, but also the composition. Composition for wealth, composition for age. Already at this conference we talked about the problem of the vieillissage, old age. Japan, of course, is having already a pyramid that is actually an inverted pyramid, and that means that more people of the productive layers of society have to be dedicated to take care of the people of the aging group. But another dimension is very important. It's the education. Several speakers talked about the awareness. Now, what population do you think is better prepared for the future? If they are aware of the problem, if they know what the challenges are, if they know what the solutions could be, or would you rather have an ignorant population? Do you think they are better prepared to face the challenge of the future? So this already is an implicit call of me that we really have to reorganize education and have a curriculum that is fit for purpose of the challenges that we face this century. Now, I know it's election time, so politicians talk a lot about the things that people find important, like being happy, being healthy, maybe something for culture, economic growth. We talked about all those kind of things. But these things, these benefits, cannot exist in isolation from the biosphere that we just spoke about, species, ecosystems, and that again cannot exist without materials and energy. So resources, natural resources and energy are the very foundation of society as we know it. And if we break that down, I'll say a little bit more about the energy we're using today, but we already spoke a lot about renewable energy. Now, the term renewable is actually not correct. The sun and the wind, of course, are renewable. And what's more, they're free. But in order to make use of it, we need a lot of metals to capture the wind or the sun, to convert it, because these lights do not run on photons or wind, they run on electrons. So we need to convert the sun or the wind into electrons. And then, okay, we're in a room without windows, but normally you capture the sun during the day and you got the lights on in the evening. Now, wind is a little bit more stable, but there are periods where you got a so-called flaute, where you got less wind. And then again, our energy needs are highest in this hemisphere in Luxembourg in the winter season, when it is both dark and cold, and you have less sun and also less wind. Because the association of really cold temperatures is often as a result of air inversion, where higher layers of the air come down to feel cold here. That only happens on days or in weeks that there is not much wind, because if there's a lot of turbulence, you do not have these ultra-low temperatures. So this already means that if we go for renewables, which I from now on will call rebuildables, we need a lot of overcapacity, because we have to cover for the periods that there's nothing and store that. Now, many of you will remember perhaps that early this year in Ostend, in Belgium, there was a very big meeting of the heads of state of all the countries around the North Sea. UK, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, I believe that France and Ireland were invited as well. And these heads of state, they agreed that they would build by 2050 300 gigawatt capacity of wind on the North Sea. Now, you may not be energy experts, but 300 gigawatt is about the amount of energy that the United Kingdom and the Netherlands together consume as electricity per year. So it's a lot of capacity. Remember, I say capacity, not output. So it is, it's 6 times more than what the England and UK and the Netherlands consume, so 6 times more. That's important because it is capacity, not output. So it's a safe margin to have. Now, if you build anything on the North Sea, then that is exposed to strong winds, to salty water, to a lot of pressure. So these things will not last for much longer than 20, 25 years. Now, Professor van Bussel from the Eindhoven University calculated how many windmills, wind turbines you need for 300 gigawatts of wind power. And he calculated that it would be about 30,000. So if you then calculate that this has to be in place in 2050, then you have to build 3 wind turbines per day. Now, on a good day, they will certainly do that. But to do that on average is a big challenge. And the other challenge is that as we start building them, let's say next year, over the next 27 years, but they only last for 25 years, then by the time we're in 2047, we have to start rebuilding the ones we're building in the next couple of years. And that means in order to have that capacity, we have to keep building 3 wind turbines a day until eternity. Now, the previous speaker talked about the pénurie des ressources. I've got good news and bad news for you. The good news is there is no pénurie. There is plenty of stuff. The bad thing is the density of the available stuff is going down. And what does that mean? You can see that here on this graph. Sorry, they're quite small. The lower one on the right actually shows you the world refined copper usage. And you've seen that has gone absolutely spectacular over the last 100 years. So in the last year, I think 2015, it's many, many times bigger. It's at 24,000 metric tons. And in the beginning of last century, it was not even 100. So spectacular growth. Now, the other graph actually shows how much energy was needed to produce that. And what you see that this is a different time scale, but what you see blue is the production, and red is the energy required to do that production. So exponentiality, you understand now what that means. Declining density has the same effect. So in 1900, in the beginning of last century, companies like Anglo-American, Rio Tinto, Billiton, who are the big mining companies of the world, were mining for copper, for bauxite, for zinc, etc. Now in 2016, our institute did a survey amongst those companies because we wanted to know what was the quality of the copper ore, and indeed the other ores, so that's the pierre minière, was 100 years ago. Now, of course, they did not have that on the computer because the computer was not there 100 years ago, but when we told them what we wanted it for, they said, we'll help you. And within 2 months, we got these answers back. Now, what do you think was the percentage of copper in copper ore 100 years ago? It was 2%. And that means that if you want to have 1 ton of copper, you need to excavate 50 tons of copper ore. And do you think that the percentage of the quality is now higher or lower than 100 years ago? Well, of course, it's lower because we already heard the word procrastination. We are efficient, or if you like, lazy people. If we go into an orchard and you have to harvest the apples, we go for the low-hanging apples first. And we leave the higher-hanging apples for somebody who comes after us who has to bring a chair. And if he's been, or she's been, the next one has to come with a ladder. And if he's been, well, then we probably need to ask the pompiers to come and get the apples from the top of the tree. Now, the difference with apples is that if you wait long enough, they will fall out of the tree. Copper ingots will not fall out of the mine. We will have to go after them to hunt them. And it will get increasingly difficult, as this graphic shows. We call that concept energetic remoteness. If an apple is hanging in front of my nose, all I need to do is open my mouth and bite. If it's hanging high up in a tree, I have to do a lot to get the same apple. So I don't get any more, but I have to do a lot more effort. And that's exactly what will happen with the metal resources we need to capture, convert, store, and distribute renewables. So it's not about availability, it's about accessibility. It's not about whether it's there physically, but whether you can get to it, the energetic remoteness. It can be so high, it's there, but you can't reach it. So natural resources are getting exponentially more difficult to get. Energy itself is also getting more difficult. So basically what we've got here is exponentiality squared. Now you may say, yeah, but in that case we have to recycle more. And you're right. Of course we need to recycle more. Now recycling today in Europe is extremely low. We recycle about 12% of all the materials. So we've got a lot of scope for improvement, which is a good thing to have. But we'll never be at 100%, and let me explain why. If you take a material out of something that it is part of, there is always what you call an unavoidable loss. And it depends on the material. It will be a relatively small percentage, let's say 5 or 10%. Or if you like, lower. But do you understand that if we will go for more rebuildable energy, there will be a lot more metals in circulation? So even if I go for perfect recycling, that unavoidable loss as a fixed percentage will become a bigger volume as well, because I have to recycle every 10 or 20 years, you know. Part of redundancy and resilience is that we build stuff to last. We need to build things that last much, much longer than we are currently used to. Right now, there's something like psychological obsolescence. Yeah, my phone still works, but it doesn't look so good and a few scratches on it, and my friends all got newer ones. I'll buy a new one as well. We have to get rid of that. That is not a responsible way of using scarce resources. So if we do the recycling, we may have desires. We want something. Well, I've got bad news for you. Things will get more expensive. So you may still want it, but you cannot afford it. So affording will then become the new limiting factor. But what will happen is that as the amount of metals goes up, the recycling gets better, the unavoidable loss will grow as well. Now, as soon as the unavoidable loss will be bigger than the new virgin resource that's added, the total amount available to humanity will start to go down. And it depends a little bit on the material, how long that will last. But we should take into account that by the end of next century, quite a lot of materials will simply not be available in the quantities that we would like to have them. So I often have debates with people about this, even people that are professors, even a professor at Eindhoven University. I'm also advised with Lightyear. I don't know whether you know that company, the solar car. And he says, well, it will all get cheaper. And I said, well, I'm not so sure about that. Now, let's look at the factors that will make things cheaper. It's, of course, scale advantage and technological efficiency. But those advantages are marginally decreasing advantages. Now, against that, what I just told you, this is a marginally exponential increasing disadvantage. Well, it is very simple to see. If you got one factor that's increasing exponentially and other factors that are decreasing marginally, in the end, it's the former factor that will lead the way. And so overall, everything that gets extracted longer term will get more expensive. Now, what is so special about us and our era, and what actually drove the fact that in 1800 we were still with 1 billion people, then in a short period of time in 1930 we were 2 billion people, so we doubled in 1 century. We added another billion between 1930 and 1960 when I also joined the party. In 1960 we were 3 billion people. And in my life, it has more than doubled. This has never, ever happened before. And what was the main driver of that? Well, it's very simple. 500 million years of prehistoric solar energy that nature very nicely converted into hydrocarbons, which is a technical word for coal, oil, and gas. Now, last night over dinner, I posed a question to my fellow diners, and I said, if I would put you on a bicycle or a rowing machine, 50 weeks a year, 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, at the end of the year, you would have produced some certain number of joules of energy. Now, how many liters of petrol do I need to have the same amount of joules that you can produce in a whole year of hard work? Any idea? Actually, somebody here on the first row was a very good guesser. He said 10 liters. That's very daring. He was nearly correct. Most people say 500 liters, 1,000 liters. The correct answer is about 15 liters. Now let's pause with that 15. Can you imagine 16 packs of milk, 1 liter? 16 packs, 4 like that and 4 like that. That's a small square, right? Now I take away 1 pack of milk. Now there's 15 left there. That's all you are able to produce in energy in a year's time. This is what we call an energy slave. It's the equivalent of 1 year labor by a human. Today's economy, today's GDP or PBE, is produced by 5 billion people like us, plus 500 billion energy slave people equivalents. And they will leave us. Now, if you've got a workforce of 505 billion units, and a large part of the 500 will go, you will notice the difference. So that's what you see here. The green part is we were living on solar flows. Humanity always lived in solar flows. And it was indeed at the end of the 18th century that we discovered coal and later on oil. So now we are working and functioning on solar stocks.
We should come to a close.
Oh, okay. Well, you got. Then let me see. What I'll do now is I go quickly. No, that's good. I will go quickly because I think if you got these two concepts of exponentiality and density, you understood a lot that is important. What you see here as well, the physical world around us is made up by solar stocks and is fossil in nature. That's why we call it fossil. But also our economic theory and our future expectations. Now, this we talked about. You know, these stocks to flows. And how indeed the green line there is the complexity of the energy system, and the orange line is the quality of the energy. This is the first time when we move to rebuildables that the quality of energy will get less than we used to, and we have to compensate that by more complexity. I will skip this, but our expectation is that the PBI, so we're now at the peak, in 2050, will actually be at the same level of the mid-90s. Now, looking at the audience here, you all remember where you lived, what car you drove, what computer you had in the mid-90s. For people here in the audience, that's not a problem. Of course, for the developing world, it is. But this is what we think that this will lead us to, because the domains of validity depend on energy, just as I showed at the first slide. This is interesting. I'm an economist by training, but I've fallen off my faith, because actually, economic science is not like physical science. Actually, it varies with the energy mix. So Adam Smith, who lived in the left part, had different theories as Keynes and Friedman and other economists that came after him. So this is balance. This is what our ancestors understood. If somebody talked this morning about using wood. If you use more wood than you produce, you're not in balance. Ever heard of the Easter Islands? They went extinct because they didn't get this. This is an important slide on energy that I wanted to share with you, and perhaps that's the last one, then Pascal, you know what other things that I had in mind. You can see here the reliability of electricity on the horizontal axis and the proportion of the population that can rely on good quality electricity. On the vertical axis, you can see the PBI, or the GDP per capita. And what you can see, that as soon as you got interruptions in the supply of energy, it causes a lots of shock waves effects, and it really brings down the GDP as a whole. And so the problem is that currently the biggest risks are getting the least attention. You know that Christian, you showed this very nice slide about the probability and the effect, and you called Fukushima. I lived in Japan, so I've been in Fukushima before it happened and also after it happened. But at least there were other parts, even of Japan, that were intact. And so the intact parts of society could be used as a basis of the crane to hoist aid to that zone or to help them out. If you have a global crisis, where will the intact part of the economy be that can be the basis for support? That's a question mark. We will see a congestion of challenges coming up. The resource crisis is actually coming earlier than we expected by a decade. The geopolitical process has changed. China announced last week they will no longer sell us gallium and germanium, which are things we need for electronics. The awareness within business, politics, and society is relatively low on this topic, so compliments, Pascal, that you organize this conference, because this is an important topic. And what we see is a accumulation and a congestion of challenges going forward, and these solutions we have to start planning 10 or 20 years before. In a view of the time, I would say I stop with this one, Pascal. So if there are questions on this, then that is fine.
That is fine with us. It is very interesting, but unfortunately we could go on for long. Thank you very much.